Israel is hammering Tehran. They want to annihilate Hezbollah in Lebanon. What exactly are they targeting?
Yeah, Anna, so they are very much continuing to pound Iran and now Hezbollah in Lebanon, even issuing evacuation orders for parts of Beirut and southern Lebanon. They say they're going after Hezbollah strongholds, Hezbollah, of course, being an Iranian proxy. Meanwhile, we know the death toll is continuing to rise across the region, so we understand now over 1,300 people have been killed in Iran. UNICEF also reporting that at least 200 children have been killed across the Middle East since the beginning of this war. In terms of what's happening in Iran, we still don't really know much about the situation on the ground because of the ongoing communications blackout. Today marks 6 days of that blackout. Lots of questions as to who could lead Iran next. We heard from Iranian state television that the Leadership Council in Iran has met to discuss next steps in terms of how to, when and how to elect the next supreme leader. Of course, they're not giving a whole lot of details because of security concerns. The Israelis have said that they would take out whoever the successor to the Ayatollah is. We've heard from President Trump that he wants to be involved in choosing Iran's next leader. But both he and the Israelis are calling for the Iranian people to really seize this opportunity. It's unclear just how organized the opposition to the regime is in Iran. But I will tell you, we have spoken to at least one group that is trying to mobilize. So this is the National Council of Resistance of Iran. They tell us that in recent days, the activities of resistance units inside Iran have been spreading throughout the country. The spokesperson for this group telling us that they've been targeting centers, what they call centers of repression. So, for example, IRGC district command centers, setting them on fire. And of course, this is just one group. It's unclear how much support they have. We know there are likely lots of different groups inside Iran preparing to mobilize. And it's also still unclear how much support the regime has. And meanwhile, there are concerns about this conflict, of course, spreading to other countries. There are fears that other countries could get dragged into this conflict. We know, for example, European nations are now sending more military assets to the region. So the French are sending jets, a nuclear aircraft carrier. The Brits are also sending jets. They have allowed the U.S. to use their base on Cyprus. That base, of course, becoming a target of Iranian drones. So there are concerns that the French and the British could potentially become targets. And today we also learned from the Australian Prime Minister that there were Australian nationals aboard the U.S. submarine that torpedoed an Iranian warship. 87 Iranian sailors killed in that attack. So that is raising concerns that Australia could also end up dragged into this conflict.
Inez de la Cuetara, live from Jerusalem. Thank you for that reporting. Max, Iran keeps targeting its Arab neighbors. The UAE says more than 200 ballistic missiles since Saturday and nearly 1,200 drones have been aimed there. Now, a top official in the region tells MS Now the UAE is taking steps to freeze billions in Iranian assets. Is Iran's strategy backfiring?
It's too soon to say. I mean, I think the Iranian strategy is to increase the cost for the global economy and therefore to exert pressure on Trump to end the airstrikes. And there is no question that, that the cost is increasing. Global oil prices have risen by about 30% since the start of the war. You're seeing a topsy-turvy effect in U.S. stock markets. So the Iranians can look at this and say that they are having some impact, but you're right, it could also easily backfire if the Gulf states are doing more in the coalition. If UAE continues to freeze Iranian assets, that would be a big economic blow to the regime. But I think from the standpoint of the Iranian leadership, their thought process is they don't have to prevail militarily. All they have to do is outlast Trump. Trump has suggested that U.S. strikes will go on for 4 to 5 weeks. And if the Iranian regime is still there at the end of that time, they will feel like they won. And I haven't seen any evidence that the regime is in any danger of falling anytime soon.
Graham, you say Iran's neighbors, quote, once wondered whether Iran could be appeased and contained. Now they do not. What does that mean for where this could be heading?
Well, I agree with Max that it's too soon to tell for sure. It is not too soon to tell. But the attitude of the Arab Gulf countries has changed probably permanently against Iran. Iran's decision to attack, especially civilian infrastructure in places like Dubai, which is where I am right now, it has caused these countries to permanently consider Iran untrustworthy. And until very recently, a place like Dubai was one of the ways that Iran understood the world. It was a place, an economic conduit through which Iran would leave its isolated country. So this is no longer a place where I think they will think in the future that Iran is trustworthy, given that they've recently been attacked by it.
Max, let me repeat what President Trump said when asked if Americans should be worried about attacks here at home. Quote, I guess, but I think they're worried about that all the time. We think about it all the time. We plan for it. But yeah, you know, we expect some things. Like I said, some people will die. When you go to war, some people will die. Your reaction to how the president handled that question?
I think it's part of a pattern of Trump just saying stuff, and often very inappropriate stuff, and Hegseth too. I mean, it kind of feels like at times they are treating this like a video game. And in fact, they're posting videos on the White House website, borrowing from movies and video games. And it doesn't feel like they're dealing with the gravity of the situation. He's just, throwing stuff out there. Americans should definitely be concerned about the terrorism threat from Iran. They have a long history of supporting terrorism. And that could be one of the ways that Trump could respond. But it's kind of interesting to see how, when it comes to deflecting congressional action, the argument from the administration is this isn't a war. It's only bombing. It's only, a special military operation, as Putin might call it. But when it comes to talking about casualties, President Trump very much invokes the idea that this is very much a war and that casualties are inevitable in wartime. Like a lot of things that Trump says, it doesn't quite add up.
Graham, Iranian state TV says there's still no decision on how to safely gather Iran's assembly of experts to pick the next supreme leader. You have some new reporting on the man who's considered the frontrunner, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late Ayatollah. One acquaintance of his told you that Mojtaba is the most dangerous man in the world. What makes him so dangerous?
This acquaintance of his was a student with him in Qom briefly, and a social acquaintance of the former supreme leader because of that. And he said Mojtaba is extremely intelligent. He's also much more ideological, much more violent in his inclinations than his father. Mojtaba is 56 years old, and I think a lot of people have thought maybe as a younger supreme leader he would be a modernizing autocrat, might try to institute change. And my source says, not going to happen. This is a person who's deeply, deeply intertwined with the military and security services of the country as it stands, and is extremely on the hardline side, maybe even on a millenarian hardline side, in a way that no one would like if he came to power.
Where does he stand on nukes?
So his father famously had a fatwa that said we're not going to use nukes, which of course coexisted with a strong attempt by the Islamic Republic to get them. His son, according to my source, would be much less inhibited about using such things. The willingness of the regime to kill 30,000 of its own citizens just in a couple days last month tells you something about how they would think about using a weapon like a nuclear weapon against non-Iranians if they got put in a corner. Mojtaba seems about as interested in doing that as anyone who might be in the running for that job.
Max, this morning, President Trump told CNN he will not insist on Iran becoming a democratic state, but he reiterated that picking the new leader is going to work like it did in Venezuela. Is that realistic? Is there an Iranian version of Delcy Rodriguez?
I think there's a real mismatch between the U.S. commitment to this war and the rhetoric emanating from the White House. And after the interview that you just cited, Trump posted on social media to say that his demand was going to be unconditional surrender. Remember, unconditional surrender was the U.S. demand in World War II, where we sent hundreds of thousands of troops to occupy Germany, Italy, and Japan. Is President Trump planning to send hundreds of thousands of troops to occupy Iran, a nation of 93 million people? It sure doesn't seem like it. So if he's not planning to occupy the country, he's not going to get unconditional surrender. And it's very doubtful that he will get to choose the next Iranian leader. This is not going to be Venezuela 2, where he happened to luck out because the vice president was willing to work with him. There is no vice president willing to work with Trump in Iran, as far as we know today. And regime change is almost impossible to bring about from the air. And on the one hand, Trump has called for a revolt of the Iranian people. On the other hand, he's saying he wants to cut a deal with an Iranian, Delcy Rodriguez. Well, why would the Iranian people risk their necks to turn out and challenge these heavily armed security forces if at the same time Trump is saying he wants to make a deal with the current regime? None of it really adds up and is very disconnected from what we're hearing from the Pentagon, where they're not talking about regime change as an objective. All they're saying is they're out to destroy Iran's capability to threaten its neighbors, which is, a realistic military objective. What Trump is saying is not a realistic objective.
Graham, yesterday, President Trump again offered immunity to anyone in the IRGC, Iran's fighting force, who lay down their arms. Do you expect anyone to take that offer?
So far, there haven't been any takers, or very few that we know of. I will say this, the Iranian regime, including the IRGC, includes a lot of people who want a lot of change in Iran. There's a lot of people who are extremely cynical about the way that Iran's been run. And there would be a lot of takers if within the state of people who said, yeah, I want to continue working for a state, so please don't destroy the state, but I would be very happy and open to work for a state that has different leadership. So I don't think that we're going to see mass defections from a state structure security apparatus that so far has had very, very few chinks in the armor, very few mass defections so far. But remember that this is a state where the number of true believers is vastly outnumbered overall by the number of people who are very cynical and very displeased by what the state has become. So that is in the long-term advantage of Iran's regime's enemies.